usually would. And as a result, we've been watching more movies and television shows and things than we usually would just because we are up with the baby. And one of the shows that we picked back up, it's a show that I watched when I was younger, and Ronnie had seen it too, but we decided to give it another go-around, is a World War II miniseries, or it's not miniseries, it's long, but it's called Band of Brothers is the name of the show. And so the show tracks a group of paratroopers, the Easy Company is their name, and they were in the European theater of World War II. So you follow them going throughout in their experiences at D-Day, and then in some of the really big battles that they were in later on. And one of the reasons this show was special to me, it came out in 2001. I watched it later when I was in college. But a lot of the major battles that these companies fought in were the same battles that my grandfather fought in when he was in World War II. So he was not in that company. He was in different places. But just watching it has made me feel like I get a connection with some of the things that happened that my grandfather had experienced. And one of the things that I like about the show is that it demonstrates a principle or a thing that people experience in war that is hard to understand until you see it. And there's a phrase to describe it, and the phrase is this. They call it the fog of war. Fog of war. And essentially, hopefully I'm giving this definition in a helpful way, but it basically means the confusion and uncertainty that takes place when you are in the heat of battle. The person who coined not exactly the term, but the idea was a German guy named Karl von Clausewitz. So you'd think he had a big fancy name, but his first name was Karl. Anyway, here's what he said. He said, war is the realm of uncertainty. 3/4 of the factors on which action in war is based are wrapped in a fog of greater or lesser uncertainty. So the fog of war means when you are in the middle of battle and bullets are flying, explosions are happening, people are yelling, people getting injured, it is difficult to know what the right decision is to make. And one of the things that I've enjoyed about watching Band of Brothers again with my wife is that I feel like it describes that pretty well. The chaos and confusion that a lot of these men and their leaders had to face in the middle of war, that fog of war that makes it hard to know what is the right decision for me to make next. And one of the key things that will determine if a military leader is good or not is if they know how to make the right decisions when they're in the middle of the fog of war. And now, that is just a description of what people have experienced in war, but in spite of that, you still have to act. And the thing that ultimately makes someone successful or not successful in the fog of war are two things. One, if they have the right intelligence, and I don't mean their brain intelligence, I mean if they have the right things that they know about what's going on in the battle. If they know more than the other side, they can act through the fog of war. And the second is, once you know it, you have to then act decisively. So the fog of war, that's the only way that you can win battles. You have to act decisively, and you have to have the right intelligence or the right counsel, the right information. I think of that because, in a lot of ways, all of us live in the fog of war. Not in an actual battle with real bullets or explosions flying around, but our lives are largely clouded by uncertainty. Knowing what the right decision is for us to make, knowing which job is the right one for me to take, which person is the one that I should spend more time with. There is a lot of uncertainty around all the decisions of our life, and we usually don't know if we made the right decision until afterward. Usually you have to look backwards to see if you had made the right decision or not. In fact, the fog of war was the state of God's people when they were waiting for Jesus to come. There's one passage that we are going to focus on for the next few weeks. It's from Isaiah chapter 9, and we sang about it actually just a moment ago. Israel was in the middle of the fog of war. Judah and Israel both. God's people were waiting for God to send a Messiah to them. They were feeling pressure from all of the major empires around them. They didn't know what God wanted for them next. And in the middle of that fog of war, they heard this. This is in Isaiah chapter 9. He says, "For a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will rest on his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. There will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and righteousness from then on and forevermore. The zeal, the passion of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this." The prophet speaks into Israel and Judah in the fog of war and tells them, God is going to take care of us through a child. And then he gives them a series of names about what this child, what this Messiah is going to be like. And tonight, I want to focus on God's first answer to what the fog of war is, and that child is this: the wonderful counselor. The wonderful counselor, the one who makes wonderful plans, the one who counsels in a wonderful way. I'm not going to focus on the word wonderful so much tonight because I think we might do that in a few weeks, so I'll save it for when we get there. But an interesting grammar thing here in the Hebrew, the word wonderful in the Hebrew is not here used actually as an adjective like this or an adverb. It's actually a noun. Wonder, like talking about God, say, or this Prince of Peace, saying he is a wonder of a counselor, or a counselor of wonders. But tonight, I just want to be very simple and say this: if we live in a time of uncertainty, what does it mean to understand Jesus as being our wonderful counselor? Here's the first thing it means. It means if we are going to believe that Jesus is the wonderful counselor, it means we have to know that our own plans or our own counsel is going to fall short. Our own plans just don't make the cut. Proverbs 14:12 says this: there is a way which seems right to man, but its end is the way of death. So it says there is a way that a person, a man or a woman, will look at and say, like, this is the right plan. This is the thing I need to follow. But ultimately, it's going to result in death. The only way, or the only kind of person who can truly have God work in their life and become who God made them to be is a person who needs to use this phrase at some point: my way isn't working. The way that I'm doing things just isn't going to cut it. I mean, if you've seen any sort of recovery group like Alcoholics Anonymous or anything like that, usually the first major step that a person has to come to is the realization that the way I'm doing things just is not working. It's not working, and it is not going to work in the future. And one of the things that's funny to me is watching a person who thinks that they know how to give good advice or good counsel, or that they could do something better than someone else when they have no idea what they're talking about. And some of you may have had this experience this week. We could talk about this. At Thanksgiving, one of the major things that people will do is that they will watch football. Am I correct? They watch football games. And I think a few of you probably had family members intimating in the things that they said that they would have a better idea of how to coach these professional football teams than the actual coaches. Am I wrong about this? Did anyone not have a family member say that? This coach is the dumbest person I've ever seen. I could have done better myself. And then you're looking at your uncle and you're like, you could not do better yourself. You just picked up a sandwich off your stomach that you forgot was there after you took a nap. You can't even organize your sock drawer. How do you think you could organize and plan better than this NFL coach? Now, sometimes professional sports coaches really do foolish things. But a lot of people, I think that they have a better idea of how to plan things than they actually do. And certainly, many of us think that we have a better idea of how to plan our lives than we actually do. There is a way that seems right to you and seems right to me, but if we follow it, the result is death. Proverbs 14:7 says this: leave the presence of a fool, or you will not discern words of knowledge. So the first thing was this: if we can't make our own plans, our own way leads us astray. The second thing is this: we can't really trust other people either. It says, leave the presence of a fool, or you're going to end up in a worse place than where you started. If our hearts are deceitful and we don't know where to go and where to plan, the other people around you don't really know that either. Now, there might be other people in your life that are better at planning and giving you advice than you could do for yourself, but the truth is, every one of us, because of sin, our hearts are twisted and corrupted. Jeremiah says it this way: the heart is sick and deceitful. Who can understand it? That's true of every person. We can't trust ourselves to make plans, and you can't trust other people to make plans for you either. There are many voices in the culture and in the world that want to tell you how to live your life and what you should believe, and the vast majority of them are simply not trustworthy because there's no human that is. Psalm 53 says this: the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt and have committed abominable injustice. There is no one who does good. God has looked down from heaven upon the sons of men to see if there is anyone who understands, who seeks after God. Every one of them has turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one. Why is it that we can't trust ourselves or other people? It's because every one of us is clouded from sin. So the world that we live in is under the fog of war. Our culture makes things complicated. Geopolitical conflicts make things complicated. Difficulties in our family make things complicated. But the biggest complication in your life that brings the fog of war is your own sin, your own ego, your own selfishness, your own self-delusion. We simply cannot see clearly to counsel ourselves. This is so important for us to understand. Jesus is the wonderful counselor because the way that you are doing it and the way that I'm doing it of our own right, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. We need a counselor. The second thing is this, though. If we can't counsel ourselves, the good news is this, that the counsel of the Lord does lead to life. Proverbs chapter 19 says this, "Listen to counsel and accept discipline, that you may be wise the rest of your days. Many plans are in a man's heart, but the counsel of the Lord will stand." In your heart and in your life, you've probably come up with a lot of plans or dreams in your heart and in your life. And a lot of times these plans and dreams that you have are actually good things. If a dream has been placed in your heart or in your mind, that very well could have come from the Lord. But I don't know about you guys, I have in my life way more ideas, what I think are incredible ideas, than I know what to do with. And it turns out that 80% of them were all terrible. I don't know if that is what you guys are like, but this is what I'm like. And Solomon says it this way, "There are many plans in a man's heart, many dreams in a man's heart, but the only thing that stands is the counsel of the Lord." I think we constantly have to ask ourselves, are these plans that I'm having in my heart, do they line up with what the Lord is calling me to do? Do they obviously contradict what the Lord wants for my life? And then if they don't contradict, then maybe you can pursue it from that point. But the purpose is this, that we need to understand that if we need to experience life, it has to start with listening to the counsel of the Lord. I want to read a few verses from Psalm 119. It says this. This is David talking about how the law and the counsel of the Lord has formed his view of the world. He says, "Oh, how I love your law. It is my meditation all the day. Your commandments make me wiser than my enemies, for they are ever mine. I have more insight than all my teachers, for your testimonies are my meditation." I know some students in here were like, "Yes, I am smarter than my teachers." That's not what that means. Verse 100, "I understand more than the aged, because I have observed your precepts." Again, a bunch of kids were like, "I know more than my parents." That's not what that means. David's saying this, "I have dwelt and thought and meditated on the law of the Lord, on the counsel of the Lord, and because of that, it has led me to wisdom and truth. The only path to life is to walk in the ways of the Lord." He says it this way. It's a very famous verse, verse 105. "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." The truth is this, God gives us his counsel in his word. If we spend time chewing on, meditating, thinking about, memorizing God's word, the result is that it can become a guidepost for your life. It can light your path. It can let you know where you're going in front of you. That only can happen if you are chewing on, meditating on the direction of the Lord, what he says in his word. And the next part is this, once you know it, we have to then trust where the Lord is directing you. Not simply to listen to it, not simply to hear it, but then also to go the next phase and to do it. So, if the counsel of the Lord is the thing that leads to life, the next question is getting a little more specific. In our initial passage we were reading, it's talking about the Messiah who was going to come. Now, at this point, Israel, in the book of Isaiah, they already had a good deal of the Old Testament. They had the Pentateuch, the first 5 books. They had Joshua, Judges, Ruth, all the things that came after. But the thing they did not have yet was their Messiah who would come to save them. And so what we have to then ask is, if Isaiah was looking into the future and thinking about Jesus, or the Lord was inspiring Isaiah to talk about Jesus, the question is, what kind of counsel does Jesus actually give? What kind of plan, what kind of advice? And the thing I want to impress upon you is this. I heard Dr. Young say this years ago, and it really stuck with me. He said the teaching of Jesus is uncommon sense. Uncommon sense. I don't know if you've heard this very often. A lot of times if people have political opinions and they're bemoaning the direction of their country, they'll say something like this: "We just need to bring back common sense. It's common sense. That's all we need to figure things out." Well, that's true up to a point. But the things that Jesus teaches, especially in Matthew chapter 5 and a few of the places we're going to read, are not common conventional sense. They are actually uncommon sense. And the reason that the things that Jesus teaches are uncommon sense is because all of our hearts have been deluded to look at the world the wrong way. And so a lot of times listening to what the Lord has for us, especially what Jesus has for us as the Messiah, is actually going to twist your perspective in a different direction than you were ever looking. I want to look at a couple of examples of this. Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says this, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." Now, common sense would tell you the people who are blessed are the people who are wealthy, the people who are joyful, the people who are strong, the people who are full, satisfied. And Jesus says the opposite. What it means to be blessed in God's kingdom is to be poor in spirit, is to mourn with people who are mourning. It's to be gentle in heart and in life and in mind for other people around you, and to be a person who is constantly hungering and thirsting for God's righteousness. He continues in verse 10, "Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." This has become a cornerstone point of Christianity in its entire history, that we're told that we are blessed if we are persecuted for the sake of Jesus. Now, I don't know about you. This is a personality trait of mine. I love to be comfortable. I really enjoy it. Is there anyone here who does not like to be comfortable? Okay, I was going to have security remove you afterward. Feeling comfortable is the normal state of what we would want. I love to sit back and feel great. I have like 25 pillows when I sleep. My wife makes fun of me about it all the time, but I like to be comfortable. Jesus tells us the opposite, the uncommon sense. To be blessed is to be a person who is experiencing pain and persecution for the sake of the Lord. Jesus takes everything that we know and turns things upside down. You would think that a happy life would be that you are wealthy, that you are healthy, that you are happy, and that everything is fine. In fact, a lot of Christian teachers will actually tell you that that's what a joyful life looks like. But Jesus tells us the opposite. He tells us the opposite. He turns everything on its head. It's uncommon sense because Jesus is the Messiah who knows what we need, not what we want. Let's continue. This is also in Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 27. He says, "You have heard it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and throw it from you. For it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell." I want to make one first observation. In the middle of reading that, I realized that our 6-year-old earlier is better at reading the Bible than I am out loud. So that was a little bit embarrassing. We found the best reader at our church earlier. I was so impressed. The second thing I would say is this. Jesus also, when talking about morality and what our hearts are supposed to be like, raises the bar so far beyond any other moral teacher that has ever lived. Jesus, with regard to murder and with anger, says it's not enough for you to just not strike or kill somebody. It's not enough for you to just not commit adultery. He says if you've even committed adultery in your heart, then you are an adulterer. Again, that is uncommon sense. Jesus is taking it to the next level. But the reason for this is Jesus knows the state of our hearts. He knows that our deepest need is that our hearts need to be changed. And so he speaks uncommon sense to us. It's not enough for you to just do the right things externally. God cares about who you are on the inside. Not just what you do, but also what you think. Finally, in Matthew chapter 20, Jesus was speaking to his disciples about how they should behave. And he says this to them. "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. It is not this way among you, but whoever wishes to become great among you shall become your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Finally, Jesus gets to the heart of it with his disciples, and he says to them, "You have seen humans behave in a common way for all of human history. The strong make it to the top. Those who have authority exercise it over others and usually abuse it for their own whims and their own pleasures." And he says, if you want to be great in my kingdom, if you want to be great in the reality of realities, you have to become a servant in the same way that I, Jesus, have become a servant. When Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 20, it follows an exchange where two of the disciples came to Jesus with their mom, and their mom says to Jesus, "Let my sons sit at your left and right hand in your kingdom." Now, keep in mind, the disciples have been following Jesus around for a long time at this point, and he'd been teaching them what the kingdom of God is like. And these two disciples weren't even man enough to come ask Jesus themselves. They sent in their mom to do the dirty work. And I will tell you, as a youngest child, I empathize with that notion. I like to try and send in my mom to take care of my problems and take care of my battles. But then Jesus responds to them after that, after saying that my left and right hand, those are not mine to give, where people sit when I come into glory. But finally he says this, though: "You've seen how the Gentiles and the others, the people of the world, use their authority. This is not how you do it in my kingdom. If you want to be great, you need to serve others. If you want to be blessed, you have to suffer and mourn and be hungry and thirsty for righteousness and be gentle in heart and life." That is what it means to be great in God's kingdom. Jesus turns everything upside down because we are upside down. We need a wonderful counselor because we don't know what we are doing with our own lives. Now, this was true for God's people, for Israel. They needed a wonderful counselor to change everything for them, and he did. But the truth goes even farther beyond that. It wasn't only Israel that needed a wonderful counselor. You and I need a wonderful counselor in our lives to listen to and to obey and to act on. And so I just have a couple simple questions for you before we finish. Tonight's message is not complicated, but it's also not easy to follow. My one question I would have is this: what kind of counsel are you listening to right now? Meaning, what kind of advice are you giving to yourself about how you should live and where you should spend your time and what you should do? And then the next question I would ask is, who are the people that you are allowing to be the most influential in your life right now? Are they counseling you toward the Lord, or are they counseling you away from him? The obvious answer to this is we need to have the same answer as David, to love the precepts and the teachings of the Lord, to love what Jesus says enough to where it becomes a lamp to your feet and a light to your path, showing you where to go. Not your own desires, not your own pleasures, not your own ambitions, but instead what Jesus tells you. That is what should be a lamp to your feet and a light to your path. But the other question I would have is this: if you are listening to the counsel of the Lord, are you also wise enough to follow it? Do you know God's word, but are you also doing it? I have a story that I really like to tell, and I may have told many of you this story already, but I'll just tell you a little snippet of it. I have a buddy, very good friend of mine, extremely close friend, and we were single at the same time, young single adults. And I spent a lot of time with him. We did a lot of ministry together at the Woodway campus of our church. And one of the things that was fun for me about my buddy is that he was a very enthusiastic dater, is the way I would describe it. He dated, several girls in the time that I knew him, and every time, and it would always start the same, he just was so passionate. Like, he would come in so excited, he'd go on a first date, and he'd come back, and he'd be tail wagging, metaphorically, like a dog coming in like with a new toy. He's just so excited about each date, and, sometimes I would say a little overly excited. He'd come back and be like, "Well, that date was so great," and he would start asking for advice. He'd say, "Well, I was thinking about sending her flowers. Should I send her flowers right now?" And I'd be like, "Well, maybe not. You just met her. Maybe take a little time and get to know her, and then maybe a few dates in, send her flowers." And he'd be like, "Man, thank you so much, Reagan. I really appreciate your help, and I love getting to run things off you and see what kind of advice you give, and I feel great afterward." And then the next day he'd come back and be like, "So after she got the flowers, what she said was," and I'd be like, "Wait a second, man. I like to give advice, and I think I'm pretty good at it, but if you're going to come to me to ask for advice, at least act like you were going to take it. Don't just go do whatever you want to do." And I remember laughing and being frustrated with this friend, but the thought then occurred to me later: how many times have I actually done that to the Lord? Meaning, I go to him and I say, "God, will you please do this for me? God, will you please come through for me in this area of my life? Will you help me break through with this one thing? Will you give me the thing that I'm asking for? God, what's your will for my life? Please show me your will." And then there are things that God explicitly tells me in his word about what he wants me to do and not do. And I'm just begging God, show me what you want me to do. And then I go do my own thing anyway. If you are going to follow the wonderful counselor, you need to listen to him, and then you need to act on it. You need to step out in faith and trust that what God has for your life is better than what you have. And the reason for that is because he is the wonderful counselor. If you follow him and walk with him closely, follow his precepts and his statutes, he will change your life. He will let your life blossom into something that impacts you and all the others around you, because the only one who can lead us is the one who is our wonderful counselor. So I guess my final question is this: who are you listening to, and are you ready to listen to somebody different?